Today's the day. Boris Johnson will reveal his cautious exit strategy for lifting lockdown. The Prime Minister will speak in the House of Commons before addressing the nation on television tonight.
Well, joining us to discuss these plans are the Chair of Global Public Health at Edinburgh University, Professor Devi Sridhar, Shadow Health Secretary Jonathan Ashworth, entrepreneur Luke Johnson and data specialist and journalist at the Financial Times, John Murdoch. So a stellar panel. Let's start with you, Luke Johnson. You've been very passionate about wanting to get this country unlocked as soon as possible. I suppose my obvious question is, given the problems we've had unlocking too fast during this pandemic and then having to go back into even more draconian lockdowns, why are you in such a rush here?
Because of the vaccines. Because I think by the end of March, something like 95% of those people who would be at risk of death will have been vaccinated, and it's changed everything.
Devi Sridhar, has it changed everything? Because, of course, we have always been frightened of the effects of COVID. If the vaccinations prevent the worst effects, are we able to open up and start to live alongside the virus?
Yeah, so Luke and I agree that it's absolutely transformative that we have vaccines. There's light ahead, but I think what we are learning from Israel and from their really rapid rollout of Pfizer is you have to vaccinate into the younger age groups, because the thing that gets us is not the deaths, it's the hospitalizations and how many people are susceptible to getting this. And the hospitalizations do go down into younger age groups. So I would say, yes, I'm all for unlocking, but it has to be driven by the data, not dates, and by making sure we keep the NHS afloat and doing it in a cautious one-way approach so we don't end up having a third wave and having to put in a reactive, harsh lockdown again.
Jonathan Ashworth, I mean, I'm sort of with Boris Johnson, words I never thought I'd ever say, in the sense of unlocking bit by bit and waiting to see the impact of each stage of unlocking on infection rates, on hospitalisations. It seems to be a far more prudent way of dealing with this now, given the lessons, hopefully, we've learned from unlocking too fast before.
Yes, Piers. Boris Johnson has finally listened to you. Hopefully he actually comes on your show so you can both interview him about it. Look, this has got to be the last lockdown. It's been so damaging. So we do need to proceed with caution. It has to be driven by the data, not arbitrary dates. Look, the broad parameters, as has been briefed to the newspapers, seem reasonable to me. We'll obviously look at the detail later today. But as we ease from lockdown, we need to sort of, if you like, lock in the advantages of our vaccination programme by doing all we can to break transmission chains. We're still not paying people decent financial support to isolate themselves when sick or if they're a contact of someone who is sick. So we're saying to the government, yeah, we do need to ease out of lockdown, but let's give people support so they can stay at home. We're not asking them to go hungry in return for stopping the spread of the virus.
OK, well, John Murdoch, you did some fascinating... OK, John Murdoch, some fascinating stuff again.
Crunching the numbers.
From the FT, crunching the numbers here. There seems to be no doubt from your crunching that the lockdown, brutal though it's been, has worked very well in reducing the transmission of the virus. But there's also been, obviously, a massive toll on the economy, as Luke Johnson has been reminding everyone regularly. Where is that line with this country in terms of economic damage from a lockdown and the ability to control the virus?
Yeah, I think I'm not in disagreement really with any of the other panellists here. I think, Devi and yourself have both made important points here, which is that the key to unlocking is going to be the fact that we do wait to see what the impact of each relaxation is. We all want people's jobs, livelihoods, earnings to come back for those who've been really badly affected over the last year. But we need to be acting cautiously. It can't just be a case of opening schools and then 2 weeks later we open pubs and 2 weeks later we open gyms. We need to be waiting sufficiently long each time to see the impact of that intervention, so that if we have accidentally sort of put too much heat back into the system, as it were, we are able to take our foot off the gas and get things leveled out. I think as the point Devi's made, and this shows up in the data from Israel, is that cases and hospitalizations continue to rise among younger age groups in Israel, while the elderly were being vaccinated. And that was despite Israel being in some form of lockdown. So if we're talking about fully reopening, I think everyone would be very surprised if we don't see the numbers tick up again among younger unvaccinated groups. And what we want to make sure is that that doesn't happen too quickly.
Luke Johnson, what is your view on vaccine passports? That the way to get the economy back up and running fully is to basically mandate that everybody has the vaccine?
I think that's a serious infringement of our freedoms, because compulsory vaccines have never been done anywhere really before for something like this. And, you know, that strikes me as a dystopian sort of totalitarian approach to this. You know, for all sorts of reasons, people may choose not to have vaccines. As it happens, Britain has embraced this vaccine far more than virtually any other country is likely to. And so I don't think there's going to be a problem. And so making them compulsory, I think, is a step too far.
I mean, the interesting question, isn't it, is whether, if you run a lot of very successful businesses, one of which I've kept in business, Gales on Kensington High Street, has been roaring away thanks to my regular purchase of donuts and croissants and hot coffee, and they've done a great job. Lots of businesses have, of course, not been able to stay open. Lots of pubs, restaurants and so on. If you're a pub owner or a restaurant owner and you thought, I can get back open if actually we just check when people come in, they've had the vaccine, I mean, I would be desperate for that. And it seems to me no different to an ID card when you get into a nightclub, isn't it? In terms of principle.
Yeah, but there are all sorts of complications. For example, it would mean that only for a period the older groups would be able to access facilities. The younger people, who in many ways have suffered the worst of these lockdowns, would still not. That seems to me iniquitous. And so I don't agree with it.
Jonathan Ashworth, I know that the Labour Party was campaigning for teachers to get the vaccine. I thought that that was an eminently sensible thing, along with other frontline workers who are exposed to huge numbers of people in shops, police, etc. But the government has not shifted on that. Is that still something that you think should happen, or are you now fully backing the return of all school children on March the 8th?
Well, we know that the long-term implications of children out of school for their learning, their development, their mental health, their physical health is profound. So we do want to see all children back in school. Of course, schools have been open for the children of key workers, and we shouldn't forget that. We still think that those key workers, such as teachers or police officers, taxi drivers, transport workers, who by the nature of their work have to mix more with others, can't sit at home on laptops and join Zoom calls, that they should be protected with the vaccine. But the beauty of the vaccine now is that we're beginning to see data which suggests it doesn't only protect you as the individual, it blocks a degree of transmission. So those people who by the nature of their work have more interactions with others, if we can vaccinate them, we're also playing that will also play a role in pushing infections down and breaking transmission.
It certainly makes sense. Professor Sridhar, I mean, the one question I have about schools, I totally get, and I've got a young 9-year-old desperate to get back to school. We'd love her to be back at school. But, you know, kids do transmit this virus, and there is something about sending millions of young people back to wrestle around with each other all day long and potentially bring the virus back into homes with older relatives, which does slightly concern me. Are we right to start with mass unlocking of schools?
Yeah, so we're taking a different approach in Scotland. So today, actually, younger kids up to P3 are returning to school, as well as a small group of older pupils in secondary schools are going back as well with mitigations. And the idea is to stagger it. So we first get younger ones in, assess after several weeks, has it gone smoothly, make sure we have testing in place, so teachers being tested twice a week, older pupils as well, and then bring back the next, bring in the next group. Because the challenge with schools, as we've learned, is not to open them, it's to keep them open.
Yeah.
It's about how many kids are in full-time education and in-person education, not just saying schools are open. So we're taking a slightly different approach here. But I mean, I think in England, they have to follow their scientific advisors and what the chief medical officer there is advising to them. OK,
John Byrne-Murdoch, very quickly. We're nearly a year now into this pandemic. You've crunched all the numbers around the world. Where does the UK currently rank in terms of death toll, death rate from this pandemic and economic performance?
Yeah, now, Look, I think one thing that has become clear in the last month, and this is something that has frustrated me a little bit actually, is that the focus in the English-speaking media has consistently been on English-speaking countries. There's been a lot of attention on what's happening in the UK, the US, Australia, New Zealand, but what's become clear recently is it's actually Latin America that's seen by far the worst of this pandemic, both in terms of mortality and economics. But yeah, the UK has certainly not performed well. More than 100,000 people have lost their lives due to this disease. And many people have lost jobs, livelihoods and money. So we've not fared well in either metric. But I think, again, to reiterate points that everyone's made here, what would be really, really damning at this stage, given everything we now have in our favour, including the vaccines, would be if we find ourselves having to lock down again a few months down the line because of acting too hastily now. So, you know, there's the past, the present and the future. What's happened has happened. I think what would be really damning is if we make similar mistakes again.
I think that is the one thing that Boris Johnson is committed to, is making sure that this time he proceeds cautiously enough that we don't have to go into another lockdown.